I don't talk about it often on the channel because it doesn't really intersect with the whole transforming robot toy thing we do here, but I really like Godzilla. Yes, okay, it's in the channel description, but still. This is the part where I spend way too much time explaining some of my prolonged history with the big guy, but I want to be clear. This isn't me trying to justify my right, I'm doing air quotes as if you could see them, to call myself a fan, and it's definitely not an attempt to flex. I just want to explain myself a bit more so you all can understand where I'm coming from. I've been a Goji fan for, I want to say a little over 30 years? Ever since my dad got us a membership to Blockbuster Video specifically so that we could rent Godzilla King of the Monsters and I could watch it for the first time. I was a literal child, I know that much. My childhood and early teen years involved rewatching a lot of English dubbed VHS tapes, either because that's all I could get my hands on, or because I had recorded some of these movies off of our TV. I owned and regularly played Godzilla for the NES, even though it kinda sucks, and I definitely sucked at it. I had a couple of this isn't technically Godzilla, but it's definitely supposed to be Godzilla plastic toys kicking around my room for years. At one point, while I was away at college, I openly stalked a Godzilla-themed t-shirt I saw in a store at a semi-local mall, and then when I eventually bought it, I held on to it for somewhere between 10 to 15 years. Honestly, the only reason I don't still have that shirt anymore is because I stretched it out to an absurd degree and it kinda started to disintegrate. A few years ago, I made it my mission to own every single Godzilla movie on DVD, or Blu-ray, I'm not really picky. Minus the 1998 American version that doesn't actually exist, I have no idea what you all are talking about. Oh, and I guess I don't own either of the Godzilla x Kong movies because they're fucking terrible. I've even written about Godzilla more than once for Unwinnable, which is a digital magazine I've been a part of since 2015, and you should totally check it out when you get the chance. Point is, the giant radioactive lizard that's sometimes a somehow still living dinosaur that became radioactive has been in close orbit to my interests for almost my entire life. So, of course, I was excited at the prospect of Godzilla getting a Transformers crossover toy. And then we found out it was going to be this. Transformers X Godzilla Synergex series Megatron type Godzilla. And you know what? I'm actually okay with what we have. This isn't to say it's perfect, because it absolutely is not. And I don't necessarily think this is the best possible way to merge Big G with the smaller T's in toy form. But knowing what to expect well before my BBTS pile of loot finally arrived at my doorstep, metaphorically speaking, because technically it was dropped in our building lobby, I'm happy with what I have here. Also, I'm going to take a moment to gush about the recent Age of the Primes G2 Grimlock. You know, the actually G2 one. The blue one. I adore this thing. It's exactly the same as the regular SS86 figure, right down to the crap Wheelie, except now he's mostly blue instead of mostly gray, and Wheelie is in more interesting colors, but the figure still sucks. But G2 Grimlock was my Grimlock growing up. And like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Metalhead, which I'm referring to the party wallop here, he was one of a handful of go-to toys that I'd take with me while getting dragged along on errands with my parents. He means a lot to me on a nostalgic level, so finally having an updated version like this makes me exceptionally happy. Now, before we get back to Godzilla Megatron, I have a Ko-fi, I have a Patreon, links to both down in the description, blah 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 blah. Support is definitely appreciated, but not required, and thank you for watching either way. Typical YouTube stuff of like, comment, share, subscribe also helps out. Okay, first, let's talk about the kaiju fent in the room. I can't believe I wrote that. Why did I write that? This is literally just SS86 Grimlock with a new robot mode head, a different color scheme, and blue versions of a few blast effects we've already seen a dozen times over. The articulation in either mode is exactly the same as it was with Grimlock. The transformation is exactly the same. The sculpting, aside from that new robot head, is exactly the same. Look up disappointment in the dictionary and you'll find a picture of this figure, right alongside a list of video game developers who use generative AI slop in their work. Anyone who saw what Takara, yes, Takara this time, not Hasbro, was showing off and noped the F out immediately probably made the right call, especially for themselves. Because there's no getting around the fact that this should have been a major event in terms of silly toy stuff, and instead we got the equivalent of a Generation Selects repaint with a movie license stapled onto it. Should this have been a new mold? Probably, but I'm not sure the toy manufacturing company that's interested in making money would have been able to justify the cost. Should it have been a mold other than SS86 Grimlock? Maybe, but I can't think of any recent examples that would be any better at representing Godzilla's classic thick boy look. Beast Wars Megatron certainly wouldn't get that point across. Should the figure have been retooled to look more accurate? Yeah, I think so. A different shape for the alt mode head and some new, probably thicker dino arms would have gone a long way to making it look more like Godzilla and less like Grimlock covered in Godzilla-themed body paint. Now this is a post-early draft script writing, Rob. I just want to chime in here for a second and say that all of this was typed out well before DNA Design unveiled their upgrade kit, which does look fantastic, addresses almost all of my complaints, and costs almost as much as the figure itself. I really need to make a video to vent about DNA's pricing lately. Should the set have included other and better accessories? Absolutely. I don't think a couple of new blast effects made to look like backplates and a more proper radioactive breath blast, which maybe could also double as weapons or something in robot mode, it would have been an unreasonable addition. Heck, Legacy Transmetal 2 Megatron with that fire club thing is right there. That would have made a better blast effect for Godzilla. Also, come on, this is Megatron, and the mold already has peg holes on the forearms. Swap Grimlock's rifle out for something more akin to a fusion cannon. It's not like the original gun elegantly disappears into the alt mode, so a fusion cannon looking thing wouldn't be any worse. Why not lean a little more into that inner Megs? And yet, with all that said, I stand by what I've said before. I am happy with Godzilla Megatron. It may not sound like it, but I am. You see, as a human being, I'm capable of complex thoughts and emotions, so I'm able to be happy with this figure because I love the SS-86 Grimlock mold, I love Godzilla, this looks cool, and I like me a good Megatron. And I can also be disappointed that Takara wasn't able to give the G-Man the proper world-shattering event-level collab figure he deserves. Now, I say wasn't able because I have some thoughts on why the Godzilla crossover might have turned out this way. All of this is purely speculative on my part. I want to be clear about this. I have no evidence. I'm just operating off of vibes. But I kind of get the feeling that most of the blame for what we ended up getting might fall on Toho. This could all be in my head or I'm misremembering, but I believe Toho is pretty protective, stingy, really, when it comes to the big guy. Maybe the studio was too picky and this was all Takara could get approved. Maybe the licensing costs were so high Takara didn't have many other options. I mean, Godzilla's been going through a heck of a resurgence lately. Perhaps Toho felt it could throw its weight around a bit because of clout? I don't know. Regardless, I don't think this is solely a Takara fumble. I also think that when you take a step back from what could have been, and what we all might have initially expected, it's not too difficult to see that this is still a pretty cool toy. Sure, the shape isn't quite right and there aren't any plates along his back and the breath blast sucks, but this dark gray color scheme looks pretty awesome, especially with those minimal but very noticeable red and silver accents. Even the dino head, which I've already pointed out is decidedly un-Godzilla, is sporting some pretty sharp painted details, but all those teeth are a wonderfully bright gold, inside and out, and the red for the bottom jaw is just mwah. Using translucent blue for the neck and then painting part of it dark gray to almost match the plastic around it is also kind of a clever workaround to try and evoke something that looks at least a little bit like Godzilla's backplates. I mean, it doesn't, but they tried. Speaking of, I have to believe at least one of the people who worked on this knows their Godzilla films, because look at those eyes. Those are 100% supposed to be the white, soulless, dead fish eyes Wonder Lizard had in Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack. Which I appreciate because, one, it's a semi-deep cut because GMK came out in 2001? And two, if you're going to do a Godzilla that's also a Megatron, you want Godzilla to be a bad guy. And GMK Godzilla was definitely a bad guy. The robot mode is equally kind of sparse, while also being very crisply detailed in a handful of places. There's some additional light gray and silver to break up the darker gray a bit more, and while the chest details were technically visible in the alt mode, they're on full display now, and they look fantastic. I'm serious. I love how much they've emphasized the venting detail on the sides, and the way they chose to paint that center clump of robo-mass has got to be a nod to Megatron's classic Darth Vader-style tummy panel. I even like the goofy Godzilla Transformers logo that's front and center in place of an Autobot badge, or I guess Decepticon badge. It's not overpowering the more intricate detailing on the rest of the chest, and since they went with a clear plastic panel instead of a colored or tinted one, the rest of the upper chest stays in the dark gray color, which keeps this from getting too visually busy. Now that new head I mentioned before, that is pretty nice too. It's very Megatron, what with the silver helmet and the pale gray face, and intense red eyes, of course. But more than that, I appreciate how it's so clearly Megs' regular bucket head with some ears stuck on the sides. Except those new flaps are painted black, so they kind of managed to pull double duty by being noticeable as new head bits, and standing apart from the rest of the helmet, so it's still really easy to pick out that iconic silhouette. It looks good and is clever, is what I'm getting at. Yeah, sure, the overall figure shape is still very obviously Grimlock with a Megatron head on it, but even though these aren't your typical G1-esque despotic proportions, I think they still work. After all, this is supposed to be Megs taking on the form of a kaiju. The kaiju. So why not bulk him up? These accessories still bum me out a lot, though. Like I've already said, this could have been where more of that instantly recognizable Godzilla style came through, but instead it's just same old, same old. Not that the silver Grimlock rifle or blueberry bubblegum blast effects look bad in a vacuum, they just don't do the whole Goji thing justice. At all. I suppose the blast effects kind of work as a sword, but again, fusion cannon. Come on. Heck, even a longer peg on the rifle so you could plug it into the forearm would have been something. Maybe it's like I suspected, and the budget simply wouldn't have allowed for any new molding outside of the robot head. But if we drop all this real-world logical nonsense for a moment, I'd have loved to get something like a larger breath effect that might have worked as an axe or something like that aforementioned fusion cannon, and backplates for the alt mode that could unfold into maybe like a cape, I don't know. They did something vaguely similar for that Mandalorian figure, right? Still though, I like this figure for what it is. Not what I wish it were, or think it should have been. It's yet another use of the SS-86 Grimlock mold, which I'm apparently compelled to own every single iteration of. It's yet another Megatron that doesn't adhere to the typical G1 aesthetic, which I always appreciate. It's also on brand for Megatron, let's be honest. And it's Godzilla. It's not a great Godzilla, but it's still Godzilla. And at the moment, it's the only official Godzilla Transformer we've gotten that I'm aware of. My ultimate point is that I do enjoy this figure despite its obvious flaws and disappointments. I also completely understand why some folks aren't willing to set those negatives aside for a toy that costs $65 and has been released in 5 other flavors already. Especially when you need to spend an additional $60+ on an upgrade kit to make the alt mode actually look like the character it's supposed to look like. I'm content with Godzilla Megatron. But I can also hope that maybe somewhere down the line, Takara and Toho will take another crack at the idea. Thanks for watching.